morning, my name is Matt Sullivan. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Wolfeboro, here with you for December's Coffee and Connections. And today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about the Town of Wolfeboro Capital Improvement Program. If you happen to catch any of the Board of Selectmen meetings recently or the Planning Board meetings, which you may not have, you may have seen a prior presentation about this particular plan that the Planning Board develops. So if you haven't had a chance to see the plan, I'm going to do a brief presentation on some of the basics of it, because the capital improvement plan is really the first step when it comes to planning the warrant articles that the voters will see in March of next year. So this is a really good foundation for us to start thinking about what our big community needs are. So this year's capital improvements plan, prepared by the Planning Board and the CIP Committee, is actually the 2019 to 2028 CIP. And the reason for that is because the plan is actually a 10-year long-term plan to look at our capital asset investment. So it's a really long-term forecast for the community, and it makes it so that our planning board and our department heads have to start thinking about the needs that will come up many years down the road. As I mentioned just a second ago, the CIP is actually put together by a very active working committee known as the CIPC, the Capital Improvements Program Committee. We have a couple planning board members on that, Kathy Barnard, the chairman, and Mike Hodder. We also have 4 members at large, Joyce Davis, Suzanne Ryan, Jim Schildnick, and Paul Whalen. We have a budget committee representative, which was new for this year, new representative that is, that's Bob Lohman. And then a Board of Selectmen representative, which is Linda Murray, who's been on the board for quite some time. So these folks actually work directly with other department heads and with other staff to put this capital improvement plan together for the planning board's consideration. Just a quick background about the plan. It was initially authorized by the voters in 1987, so it's been going on for a little over 30 years now in many different forms. This is really, I think, we're really refining it every year, so I think this is really the strongest plan that we've had in that period of time. One of the big things, because it's a planning board process, is that it's intended to look at these capital projects in the context of the community's master plan, which if you've heard my prior conversations on Coffee and Connections, we're actively working on updating right now. But really we want to make sure that these capital projects that our departments are taking on are in concert or operating sort of in the same direction that our master plan does. So that's critical. It is a 10-year plan. It's not a binding plan, and what I mean by that is it's really advisory in nature from the planning board, but in Wolfeboro it's a little more than that. Department heads and the Board of Selectmen and Budget Committee really use this to do their budget prioritization and their warrant article creation, and I think Wolfeboro is a bit unique in that way. We go a bit beyond the advisory role of the plan. As I said before, the projects are submitted by department heads starting in about July or August of the year, reviewed by the CIP committee and prioritized, and then ultimately a draft document is created, brought to the planning board, and then subsequently the Board of Selectmen and Budget Committee. So that's sort of the process behind it all. So let's dive into this year's plan. And one thing I want to point out right away is that in the plan we really focus on the upcoming year's projects. We do look out that 10-year period, so we have projects all on that 10-year time frame, but 2019 is really the most imminent year, and we really focus on the projects therein. So let's take a look at 2019. So of the capital projects, which I should note too, the capital projects tend to be those that rise above $100,000, and typically they're things that aren't recurring in nature. They're things that we need to, big, large purchases that we need to make as a community, typically, again, above $100,000. So of those projects, there are really 4 different project funding types that we're looking at in 2019. So up in the right-hand corner, sort of the darker, brighter red there, we have about $1.173 million in projects planned to come out of the general fund. That works out to be about 1/4 of our total project load in 2019. These are projects that will have to be raised via actual cash appropriations as part of the meeting, or as part of the vote in March. On the left-hand side there, this is actually electric department projects. These are funded out of the electric fund. Now what's unique about these, this is another 25% of our project load. These projects are actually already paid for through the electrical rates, so there's no tax impact for that $1.13 million that we're looking at in 2019, so that's important, as opposed to the general fund projects I just talked about where cash does have to be raised. Bottom left, these are sewer projects or wastewater projects. These are funded via a settlement that the town received several years ago, so we have about $800,000 in 2019. That's about 17% of the project load. But because this is a settlement and it's they're funds that the town already has on hand, no tax impact on that side of things either. Bottom right-hand corner, which I think is really the most critical part of this, these are capital reserve account withdrawals. The town has been very progressive in the way that it's funded projects. it's created a lot of these capital reserve accounts so that we can sort of save money so that we can be prepared for capital expenditures that need to happen in the years that are appropriate. So 35% of the funding that's necessary in 2019 is actually expected to be drawn out of existing capital reserve funding. So that's a huge portion of what we're looking at doing in 2019. That's $1.7 million. I should point out here that these are withdrawals out of the capital reserve. We will continue to fund these capital reserves, but I can tell you that the funding will be less than $1.7 million in expenditures that we have there, and I'll get into that in just a second. Just to look at sort of the historical numbers here, looking at what the CIP has requested versus what the voters have approved. Sort of a couple of interesting things to look at here. Obviously, we've initially back in 2006 when I started looking at this, the CIP requested amount was pretty high. You see above $8 million. We had some sewer issues that we had to deal with at that time. There were some sort of imminent threats that had to be dealt with. But what I really want to point out is sort of the disparity between the blue and the red there back in 2006. That means that the CIP requests were significantly higher than what the voters ultimately approved. And I think that as you look through the pattern out to 2017, there's a change there that I think is really great for us, and that is that the CIP requested and voter approved numbers have become more in alignment. The reason for that, I think, is that we've become more intelligent about prioritizing our capital assets, gotten better at communicating them, I hope, to the public, and really clearly identifying and prioritizing what those capital projects are so that the public can understand and subsequently support them. So you'll see that out in 2017, what the CIP requested versus what the voters approved was really well aligned. And I think that's a great indicator for the process that I'm talking about right now. So looking out over the 10-year period, this is looking at 2019 out to 2028. This is the total project cost that we're looking at. So in 2019, we're looking at about $5 million in project cost. Going up a bit in 2020 to, or actually quite a bit, above $8 million. Down in 2021 to below 6, about $5 million. Up to about $14 million in 2022, and the reason for that is because we're looking at the public safety building in that year, so that's why that's such a huge number. Dipping down again in 2023 and then sort of variable out to 2028. And the reason for that is largely because as we go into the out years of the CIP, it's more challenging for department heads to predict what their capital projects will be. So if you look at our CIP spreadsheets, which are actually available online, I should mention, you'll see that there aren't a whole lot of projects in those out years, the 4 out years of the CIP. That's simply because department heads haven't quite gotten there yet. Whereas the first, sort of the next 5 years are relatively predictable when it comes to a capital project perspective. Looking at CIP project tax impact, one thing I mentioned just a second ago is that tax impact versus project expenditure. In many cases, we're doing a very high dollar amount in projects, but the tax impact is actually lessened because we've either saved up for that, we have grant funding, we have settlement funding, we've funded it through our electrical, sewer, water rates. So not always do our capital projects have a huge hit to the tax roll, and I think that's something that's critical to point out. So here, if you look through the 10 years of the CIP, you'll see that we have some variability between about $2 and $4 million moving out for that 10-year period. But it's significantly less than this prior slide that I showed here that showed these impacts going all the way up to the $14 million, $8 million. Those aren't going to be the real tax impact numbers. These are, and you'll see there's some variability there, so that's important to point out. We also look at how our larger projects, which we believe will be bonded, we also look at how those bonds will impact our debt service payments. So obviously we're continuing to pay off debt service on bonds that we have right now. As we look out over this 20-year period, actually, you can see that starting in 2019, we sort of lead up to a spike in 2023. The reason for that is that we expect in 2023, that's when we would bond the public safety building. We recognize that that project may change in scope, but that's when we expect we would do that. And then over time, where we have less predictability, you see the bond debt service decreases simply because we're beginning to pay off more debt. I would say, though, that it's likely that we will add additional bonds through that period, so it's more likely that this becomes sort of a stable line, and that's exactly what the CIP is intended to do, stabilize the tax rate impact, and bond payments are a part of that. We do look at capital reserve accounts. I mentioned this is really our primary funding mechanism for 2019. We look long-term, though, to make sure that based on what our capital reserve contributions will be, we want to make sure that we have enough funding available to actually make the capital purchases necessary. A good example is when it comes to our fire trucks, we contribute $186,000 a year to that capital reserve. If we have a $1 million fire truck purchase that's necessary, we want to ensure that we've actually saved $1 million within that capital reserve account so that we have the funding available. And last year we actually had an issue where we had to adjust some numbers for that exact reason. You can see in 2021, that's the only spot where we have a little bit of concern. That's actually in the dockside parking lot. We anticipate the project cost being a bit higher than what we're projected to save over that period of time. So in 2021, we'll have a decision to make. Either we'll have to contribute more to the capital reserve, or we'll have to cover that additional cash some other way through the voters. So we want to make sure that we're really healthy with these capital reserve accounts as we look forward for the next 10 years. So I'm going to quickly go through the 2019 projects. If you're looking for more detail on these, please look at the CIP document itself or check out the Board of Selectmen presentation. When it comes to the electric department, they do have one project in 2019. It's based on sort of the next phase, if you will, of their 390 line that the voters approved in 2018. This is the construction of a new substation on Laner Street where there used to be a substation. It's a $1.13 million project. But again, no tax rate impact for this because the funds have already been raised as part of the electrical rates. But you will see some work going on when it comes to this, and this will be presented to the voters for hopeful approval in 2019. Public Works Department, this is typically the most intense department when it comes to capital projects. A few things going on here. We do have some vehicle capital reserve purchases, things like our graders, our loaders. We actually have a capital reserve set up for that. This is a great example of where on an annual basis we contribute $170,000, so that's the tax rate impact to the voters. But in 2019 we're expected to make quite a few purchases and to the level of $370,000. That's because we've saved up that balance within the capital reserve account. And we'll be buying a new loader, a new dump truck, and also an additional highway department vehicle as well. So sort of moving through the useful life of our equipment. Annual road maintenance, we have quite a few roads on the list for 2019. College Road, Tri-Track Road, Key Waden Road, North Wolfeboro Road, in addition to some design and engineering for Bryant, High Street and Park Avenue. All of that bringing us to a total of $800,000, which is slightly down from the $870,000 that was approved by the voters back in 2018. This will be funded. This is a project that's raised via cash, so we'll go to the voters with a cash request for that $800,000. But I think it's an important part of our asset management here in the town. Additionally, in the public works side of things, we have the dockside building restroom upgrade. This is actually approved by the voters in 2018. The project cost, though, and because of labor needs, we've deferred this to 2019. The project costs have gone up a bit. So we're actually going to be going to the voters for an additional request of $145,000 to build on the $150,000 that was appropriated in 2018. This is a critical part of the dockside reconstruction that we're looking at. I'll get into a few other projects in just a second here. But again, this project may be familiar because you saw it in 2018, and we'll be going for a cash appropriation there. We do have a dockside dock capital reserve account. We looked at both repairs to the existing docks and potential dock expansion over the past few years. This year we're proposing a contribution to an existing capital reserve account as we begin to sort of do the permitting, design, engineering for this. So this year we're proposing $175,000 to be contributed to that capital reserve account so that we have the funding available for it. Pleasant Valley Road Bridge, this is a bridge project that's on the DOT red list. You may have heard of that. We have a lot of infrastructure issues obviously in the state of New Hampshire. This is one of the bridges in town that is really a high need. It's a very complicated project from a funding perspective, but the key thing to understand is that from a tax impact perspective, this is $148,000 approximately. It needs to be raised by the voters in 2019. In total scope, though, we have about $1.25 million worth of project left to do, but primarily the funding will come from NHDOT as part of their project. Another critical part of our dockside repair work is the dockside parking lot. That's scheduled to be done sort of as the last phase of the dockside effort, and the reason for that is that a lot of our work involves some reconstruction closer to the water. The parking lot is really the critical gap between obviously our main street and the water, and therefore we want to make sure that we don't cause any damage to the parking lot, and therefore we've proposed that as part of the last phase. We're continuing to contribute to an existing capital reserve account. And we intend to do this work sometime between 2020 and 2021. This year we're proposing a $50,000 capital reserve contribution, and that would be a cash appropriation by the voters. When When it comes to our water and sewer departments, our water department actually doesn't have any capital projects proposed in 2019, though there are some proposed in out years, but you won't see anything from them on the 2019 warrant article as it stands right now. The sewer department does have a few things planned, the first of which is its ongoing upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant. Again, part of an active asset management plan that we have for one of our critical facilities here in town for those who are particularly on sewer, or anyone who uses our downtown services beyond that. We contribute an annual amount of $125,000 to that capital reserve account. In 2019, though, we're actually proposed to do a bit less when it comes to actual expenditure. We're looking at $62,000, which will mostly go towards upgrades to the electrical systems there. It's really critical to have a reliable and redundant system there, and electrical upgrades are a huge part of that. But again, this will be a capital reserve account contribution so that in the future, we have additional funds available for some more significant upgrades that may need to happen. We're going to continue as well to work on permitting, design, engineering for our RIB effluent disposal solution. For those of you who haven't heard a lot about this, we are working on a sort of innovative effluent disposal solution in the northern section of town through our administrative order by consent with NHDES. It's really a lot of pilot testing and some very innovative things that are happening there, and for that reason we need to continue to go through our sort of collaboration, coordination, permitting, design, engineering with the state of New Hampshire. So this is a $500,000 cost that we look at in 2019 for doing that. But it's important to point out that this is also, this is a settlement funded project, so there'll be no tax rate impact. But it's just important to note this work is going on because effluent disposal is a critical part of Wolfeboro's infrastructure issues, particularly because of our sensitivity to our water resources. Fire department, police department, and the public safety building. The fire department does not have any capital projects proposed for 2019. They're continuing to build up their capital reserve account, and they'll be requesting a $186,000 appropriation to that, but they aren't actually scheduled to purchase any new equipment. The police department is proposing to establish a new capital reserve, and what they're trying to do here is save up money so that they can purchase an upgrade to their dispatch console. Our central dispatch is critical not only for the police department, but for our fire department, public works, electric. All of that communication runs through central dispatch, and we are getting to the end of the useful life for a lot of the equipment there, and therefore the police department is really interested in saving money so that when that system fails, we have enough available to make a purchase. So the capital reserve account contribution proposed in 2019 is $102,000. That will occur for a period of 4 years in order to build up about $400,000 worth of funding. Hopefully with the purchase of a new dispatch console in 2022, or in the event of catastrophic failure, we may need to actually make that purchase a little bit sooner, but we're hoping that's not the case. The public safety building is obviously a project that's getting some news right now. It was originally scheduled in the CIP for 2022. We're looking now a little bit more at the cost and the scope of that project, realizing it's going to be a really huge project and that there's a lot of decisions left to be made about location, size. So we're going through an active period of studying what the needs are of the police and fire departments. In 2018, we released a study that suggested that we would be looking at a project cost of about $12 million. We recognize that that number needs to be refined and revisited and further studied. But regardless of what the total cost will be in 2022, we want to ensure that we're beginning to build up funding so we can do the design, permitting, and engineering. And as a result, we're proposing a contribution to a capital reserve of $100,000 in 2019 in order to continue to study the issue of site suitability, those sorts of things, and then escalating that capital reserve contribution out for the next 4 years from $100,000 to $200,000 to $300,000 to $400,000. Really to make sure that when the time comes for the large project expenditure, we've built up enough funding to have the right information available to us, and so that we can sort of level or reduce the impact of the project to the tax rate. I think that's a critical thing that we're trying to do here too. So again, much more work to be done on this project, but we want to plan for what will happen or what we believe will happen in 5 years based on what we know now about the project. Beyond 2019, we do have some 2020 horizon projects. The second year, so the 2020 year in the CIP, is an important one to look at. It's not the critical focus of the CIP, but we do want to have an idea of what we're looking at. I won't go through these in detail, but that gives you a sense of what our projects look like for 2020. You can remember back to our tax rate impact, we do sort of expect an increase in capital projects in 2020, but there's a lot more work to be done on that, and this may change over the next period of 1 year. Additionally, as departments develop their capital schedules, a lot of these projects may fall out, some may go in. This is really subject to change, but this is our best guess at what we look at for 2020. In the 2019 CIP, this is the first year we've included this category called placeholder projects. Now, these placeholder projects are projects that we recognize there's a community need for, but we don't have enough information to actually place it appropriately on our CIP in one specific year, nor assign a specific cost estimate to it. But again, we recognize that there's going to be a need and it's a community priority. So the 4 placeholder projects that we put in the CIP this year: the Libby Museum building improvements, which you may have heard some discussion about expansion and some renovation that needs to happen there to existing issues with the building. We put that in year 2025, but we recognize that that could either move significantly further ahead or back based on a feasibility study that is being completed and was approved by the voters in 2018. But that's out in 2025 as of right now. Additionally, Pop Whalen building, this is something that's really come about through the CIP this year. We recognize there are some significant issues with the Pop Whalen building. Initially, we had believed that this could be remedied through some dehumidification work. We're now recognizing there are some more systemic issues with the building, including some roof issues that only increase our dehumidification issues. So we recognize we need a more comprehensive solution to that building. That's something that we're going to be looking at in 2019. We've put this into a far out year of the CIP, but it's actually a 4-phase project, and it may be that one of those phases will be done in the next 3 to 4 years, or even 1 to 2 years, depending on what our study of this problem leads us to. 2 projects in 2028. These are projects we really don't have a good understanding of. The first is the MED Generation Building / Community Center parcel reuse. We have 2 structures down there right now which are deteriorating, one of which has been vacant for some time. There are environmental issues on the site that we are actively dealing with, but we view this as really a critical area for potential redevelopment, whether it be municipal redevelopment or private redevelopment. So we're doing some active work right now to look at the environmental issues that are there and how they might impact reuses, but we're not sure when we may actually have a reuse proposal in front of us. So we've put that into year 2028, but like the prior Pop Whalen project, we could see some movement on this effort in the next 1, 2, 3 years. But it's really not well scoped right now, so it's in an out year. Additionally, in 2028, this has come out of our master plan work that we're doing right now. There's really an interest in some sort of community center for seniors, youth. That's a priority for the community. There's no question about that. Wolfeboro's demographics certainly lend itself to the need for a community center, particularly for our seniors because of our large elderly demographic. But again, we have really limited scope and understanding of what this project might look like, where it might take place, how large it might be, what the funding sources might be, but it is a community priority. And for that reason, we've put it in year 2028 of the CIP, which is really the farthest out year that we have. So these are the 4 placeholder projects that I think you should sort of keep in mind, but recognize that we're going to be coming back to in the future. With that, I hope I've given you a good summary of what our CIP report looks like for this year. As I pointed out before, these documents and the presentation I just gave are actually available on the Town of Wolfeboro website in the Planning and Development Department and on the Planning Board pages. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I should be able to answer any of them, but I would really pay attention over the next couple months as these projects get refined in front of the Budget Committee and subsequently as part of the deliberative session and the voting. But really, I appreciate your time, and I'll see you next month on Coffee and Connections. Thank you so much.